Alright, Diamonds in the Rough, welcome to week 4 of the homework exercises. Good job on completing last week's homework exercise, which was the form manipulation. I do have to point out we had less people participating in the homework compared to the week before, which isn't that concerning yet. But form manipulation is a pretty difficult exercise. We're probably going to do this again in the future once we've covered a bit more when it comes to perspective, because then you'll also be able to keep better track of your forms when you're manipulating them. Now, what I want to work on this week is line control. Line control is also one of the most important fundamentals when it comes to drawing. It's the one that not a lot of people talk about, not a lot of people actually practice it, but it constantly influences how good your drawings will turn out. So we need to get really good at it. And we're not going to work on, practicing line control itself by doing this exercise where you just draw lines over and over and over. I hope that you guys are doing this already, because I do have a video on this, and I've also been pinging people in the Discord about doing their daily line work drills. Definitely make sure that you do these every single day, or at least on a regular basis. And what we're going to work on in this week's homework is a bit more specific, or I should say more practically, because we're going to be practicing how to apply these line control skills while we're actually making a drawing, because just doing the practice exercise every day is good, but you also need to apply what you've practiced. Now, line control is a mechanical skill, meaning you're not just going to get better at it overnight. It takes a ton of time, and you also have to practice it separately. A lot of people think that with line control, you get better at it naturally as you're just drawing normally, which you do. But if you want to make more and better progress, you have to practice it separately. It's like if you're doing a sport, you could just do the sport and you're going to get better at it over time. But if you want to make actual progress, you also have to do physical exercises like going to the gym, for example. So that's why I recommend doing line control exercises on a regular basis. But we're going to work on actually applying these. There's two things that we need to think about when doing this homework exercise. The first one is the ghosting technique, and the second one is that we need to learn how to draw our lines slowly. First, we have the ghosting technique. This one is pretty simple, but if we have 2 points and we want to draw a line between them, we could immediately try to draw the line, but if we do that, we risk missing our target, or we can potentially not draw the line that we want. So instead, we can apply the ghosting technique, which is basically we're mimicking the movement of the line without actually drawing the line itself, and then once we feel like our arm has a good idea of what the movement is like, that's when you draw the line. If we have a point over here, you can mimic the line a couple times until you feel like you have a good idea of what this line should look like, and then you draw it. And you can do this with every single line. And of course, you don't have to mimic the movement this many times. I'm just showing this as an example. But if you get really good at it, you can just mimic the movement once and then you draw the line. The benefit to drawing your lines this way is that you can get an idea of what the line looks like before you've drawn it. This means that you can keep your drawing cleaner, which is good for traditional, of course, but it also means that you can draw your forms more accurately. Your lines will actually end up at the points where they need to end up, and it gives you time to think ahead. A lot of people try to draw their lines too quickly, and this doesn't give your brain any time to think about what the form needs to look like, meaning you have to make a lot of adjustments as you're drawing. But by doing it this way, you're giving your brain time to think, is my line correct? Are the proportions correct? Is the perspective good? So ghosting is the first thing we need to worry about, and then the second thing is that I want you to draw your lines slowly. You don't have to go super slow, but just slow enough to the point where you can feel like you're actively controlling your line. The reason why I want you to go slow is because drawing a line is about two things. It's about the line ending up where it needs to end up, which we went over with the ghosting technique, and then it's also about the line having a good trajectory. The trajectory is the path that the line follows. Every single line needs to follow a certain path for it to represent the form that you're trying to draw. If we're trying to draw a bull war, for example, our line needs to follow this trajectory, and then once it gets up here, we need to follow this trajectory, then we go this way, and then we follow this trajectory. We cannot do this. If we draw the line like that, it's a completely different bottle, right? Trajectory is basically about accuracy. You have to think about it like we have a bunch of points, and the line that we draw has to touch every single one of these points. And of course, you could go even more detailed with it and have more points in between all of these points, and then we have to make sure that the line touches all of those points, right? By drawing our line slowly, we can actually make sure that it's touching all of the points that it needs to touch so that we have a correct trajectory. But when you draw your line slowly, something that could happen is that your hand might start shaking and your line ends up being wobbly. And when you draw your line quickly, that shakiness will disappear and the line ends up clean. The shakiness is not a problem at all. Your line will be correct as long as it has the correct trajectory. It doesn't matter how shaky the line looks. You can always do a second pass to clean it up. If you draw your line fast, you might end up with a cleaner line, but if it misses all of the points it needs to hit, the line's incorrect anyway. So essentially, we're going to be combining ghosting with drawing our lines slowly, and we're going to apply this to drawing actual forms instead of just drawing random lines. For our practice, I think it's best if we stick to simple objects like boxes, cylinders, pyramids, instead of picking more complicated objects, because if you've never used the ghosting technique before, it's a new habit you have to learn, and if you're doing something too complicated, you're just going to default to drawing how you're used to drawing. But of course, if you're already used to ghosting and drawing slow lines, you could of course grab more complicated objects and then try to draw those. So we're constantly going to have to be thinking about the line trajectory. The first line I want to draw is this one. We have a point here and we have a point here. So I'm just going to draw these points initially to make it easy to show. Once we have these points, we mimic the movement. And then once we think we have it, that's when we actually draw the line. Then our next point is going to be over there, and we have to replicate an angle like that. So that should be like this. I'm not too concerned with perfectly replicating the reference, because that's a completely different exercise. Instead, I just want to worry about ghosting and drawing slow lines. Then we're going to draw the vertical lines. So we have one over here. We can immediately draw this one and draw this one as well. Then we have a diagonal up here. And we have one going this way. Then next we can draw this line. Also think about the perspective. Make sure that these lines are all converging to the same vanishing points. And then lastly we have this one. And then for the flaps, we can do the same thing. Make sure that we mimic the line first. And these are all straight lines, meaning they have the same trajectory all the way throughout. Of course, you can do this with curved lines as well, but it gets a lot harder with curved lines. And I think we're going to do a cylinder after this just to see. Then I'm going to place this line over here. And again, I'm not too concerned with perfectly replicating the form, because that is a completely different exercise. That would train your observation skills a lot more. Of course, you could also worry about practicing your observation skills while you're doing this, but I kind of recommend working on one specific thing instead of doing multiple things at the same time, at least for these homework exercises, but you can of course do whatever you want to do. For a bottle, we need to start with the minor axis and then do the major axis, which I've covered in the second homework exercise. So if you don't know how to draw cylinders yet, be sure to watch that one. The bottle is divided into three parts. We have a sort of tapered cylinder up here. We have a kind of dome shape up here. And then we have the actual body of the cylinder here. So I'm going to place the major axis of that tapered cylinder, well, the bottom of that tapered cylinder over here. I'm going to place the major axis of the top of our cylinder over here, and then of course the major axis of the bottom can be over there. Then I suggest drawing a rough guideline of our form. So we have our tapered cylinder. The body of the cylinder appears to be about twice as wide as the top cylinder, so we'll have one part here and then one part here. Ghosting is also really good for marking where your proportions are and measuring your proportions, by the way. So instead of just randomly placing the line and hoping that it's correct, you can mark one point here and then ghost the line down, and that tells you that it needs to be over here. Okay, now we can draw the ellipse. Ellipses are, again, probably the hardest shape when it comes to drawing, so for these, you'll have to practice them a lot separately, and ghosting helps a lot with making sure that your ellipse has the correct shape. Then next we have this one at the bottom. I also recommend just drawing through the form so that you can make sure that your ellipses are correct. Then we have the ellipse right here. I should probably mark how wide I want that one to be. It's going to be a little bit wider than this one because it's located further away from the horizon line. And then for the last ellipse, all the way at the bottom, it needs to have the same width as this one at the top. So I can use ghosting to extend these lines down and find that the width is going to be right over here. And then I need to make sure that the ellipse is slightly taller than that one. I think this bottle might be a bit too tall, but it doesn't really matter. Now we need to connect these two, so we'll go then on the other side. I also recommend rotating the canvas kind of regularly, just so that you can draw lines that you're comfortable with instead of forcing lines that you're not comfortable with. Especially with ellipses, I think it's a good idea to get really good at drawing ellipses from one particular angle instead of becoming the jack of all trades and getting mediocre at drawing ellipses from a bunch of different angles. Then now all we have to do is connect these, and then we're done with this form. So this is going to be this week's exercise. You can draw whatever you want. I recommend doing simple forms if you're not used to how ghosting works, but draw whatever you want. Make sure that you draw your line slowly. Think about what the line needs to look like before you draw it, and make sure you ghost it, which gives you time to think. If you want to actively participate, you could always join the Discord server, which is linked in the description, and there's also a playlist containing all of the homework exercises, so if this is the first one that you've come across, you could always go back to week 1. But I guess I will catch you all next week.